Having played over 500 hours of this game back on PC, it'll be a slightly different review to the normal format, but I will give scores at the end. Hi everyone and welcome back to SwitchUp. Now I'm sure you're aware about No Man's Sky. When it launched, it was in a terrible state. I was incredibly hyped by what Sean Murray presented in all of his interviews, and you could see the passion and vision he had for it. Now unfortunately, as with many things in life, the reality didn't quite live up to those expectations. It was a bit of a buggy mess. It didn't have nearly half of the features that were spoken about, and there were people demanding refunds left, right and centre. Now when that happened, Hello Games, the small indie team that created it, essentially went into hibernation. Everyone thought that was it, they were done, and we would never hear from them again. Little did we know though that Sean Murray, the vision he had, it's what he wanted to bring. They just couldn't bring it in time. And they stayed hibernated away, badgering away on the game for many, many years, releasing these large pivotal updates that added much of that content. And I think they really tipped the balance with the community when they released the multiplayer update. It was a game-changing thing that people had asked for since the beginning, and it meant that you could bump into people in the universe and also show off your amazing base creations. So to hear that they've attempted to bring it across to the Switch doesn't really surprise me knowing this team. But how does it perform in docked and handheld mode? And can I force it to crash by building a monstrosity of a base? And in the end, is what's here worth your money? Well, hopefully I can answer all of those questions with this performance-based review. No longer one man's lie. Well, let's find out. No Man's Sky is going to cost you £39.99 or your regional equivalent, and that is a download of just 3.7 gigs. But firstly, what do we and what don't we get with the Switch version? The biggest omission and my biggest disappointment is the fact that it doesn't include multiplayer. Although online multiplayer chance encounters were incredibly slim, if you were just exploring, when they occurred, they're magical, and the thought that you know there's other players out there really does change the feeling of the game. You'll find several different game modes, from the survival through to the creative, and there are also community game modes, which are limited time events. Although I am disappointed it doesn't include multiplayer, there's more than enough content here for a single player experience. When you first start out with nothing on a desolate planet and gradually build up and discover more about the civilizations that lived in these areas, to eventually start constructing your own home, it's just an incredible experience. Now the most important aspect I would say is probably the performance. So we're going to go through frame rates, we'll look at the image quality, some of the drawbacks to the Switch version, and an overall impression. So frame rates then. When you first begin the game, you'll be pleasantly surprised finding that it runs at 30 FPS and with very good frame pacing, making it feel smooth as you run around the initial areas. Now for many, one of the largest appeals will be the base building. As such, I got a little bit creative to see how much I could affect the frame rates. When you're on foot or moving around your base, frame rates certainly are impacted if you're building very large structures, but it's not nearly as bad as I thought it would be. The biggest impact I was able to make was if I launched a ship near the largest part of my base and then turned back to look at it, I could drop the frame rate right down to 20 FPS. It's kind of expected when you build a skyscraper that goes out into space, and I could probably do the same on my old PC, but it's admirable how as soon as you turn away from it, frame rates are back up to 30 FPS, or if you're running through its corridors, they maintain 30 FPS. There's some very clever use of what's being rendered and handled by the CPU and GPU when you're not looking at it. A good way to kind of test this is when you first start a planet or when you first load in, if you spin the camera around, it will load in some assets that were otherwise hidden. Now once they're there, but I can't imagine the work that went into making this thing run 30 FPS most of the time. Now the image quality, well, it's okay. Sometimes, especially when you're building larger structures, you'll notice the dynamic resolution scaling will grab that resolution and drag it down. This gives the appearance of blur. It can introduce some aliasing on the edges of objects, and if you're playing on a large TV, expect the experience to be understandably of a lesser quality than if you're playing on any other device. But even then it looks far better than it has any right to. The fact that it still maintains some shadowing for the player, albeit at a lower resolution, and self-shadowing, as well as environmental shadows, is really quite impressive. You might wonder how the transition between the planets and space affects frame rate as well. Well, when we do that, it's staggering how smooth they've managed to keep it. That goes for when you're leaving a planet or entering an atmosphere. It's not without its visual bugs and anomalies. The camera can be shifted so that you can see through the floor. And let's just say I didn't intend to climb an invisible ladder to heaven, but that seems to have happened in this instance. And there seem to be quite a few missing collision maps so that you can travel through otherwise solid objects. As far as crashing goes on the Switch, well, I've only played about 3 or 4 hours of this Switch version. It's not to say you wouldn't have any, but I've not. Now, although it's predominantly a third-person experience, I did wonder if they would have included some form of gyroscopic controls. I know, I'm always banging on about them, but when I'm aiming, I do like to use that joycon gyro. It's not the case. There's no gyro here. You'll be using standard controls, right stick to aim, left stick to move, and there's some tweakability here, although the customization options aren't extensive. So visually the game's looking impressive for what it is, but how about handheld? Now handheld for me is the way to play this release. The OLED screen, as we've heard time and time again, makes what otherwise looks okay over a stretched image look crispy when you're playing in handheld. And it also feels remarkably smooth. Performance remains the same. Transitions to outer space and down to planets are almost flawless. However, frame rates will drop when you first reach the surface as items load in. But just look at it. How is that happening? While it's difficult to assess audio quality, when using headphones, things sound okay. It doesn't sound like the sample rates have been massively reduced, although they may have slightly, and that brilliant soundtrack remains intact. As far as gameplay then, predominantly if you've not played it, you're dealing with an exploration game, merged with an action simulator I guess. It allows you to fly different vehicles, create any bases you want, and movement around the world is relatively straightforward, moving with the left stick and the camera with the right. However, when you enter base building mode, you can actually switch this perspective to allow you to oversee the entire area. It works reasonably well, but controls can get a little fiddly, and there's a full storyline to work through. The creatures in the world can be interacted with, allowing you to scan different items, make new discoveries, and also name anything you find. If you arrive into the game for the first time, there have been a lot of changes to make it more accessible on the Nintendo Switch. When you return to the game, it will track a log of exactly where you're at with the story, and it will give you a summary of the progress so far. As you make new discoveries and work new things out, it will all be stored within an info portal that you can go back to and read through, and it will also provide you tips and different options of things you can do with it. They've changed and improved the inventory. It means you've got a bigger backpack, but perhaps the biggest change here is the relaxed mode. I think we've all seen the million cozy games and chill games videos. I wouldn't say No Man's Sky really fell into the category of a cozy game, but with the relaxed mode, it changes the pace and the overall feeling of the game so that you can just enjoy the experience and chill. I mentioned the survival mode at the start, and it's brutally difficult, and that's there to take things in the other direction. In survival, you're building up your ships, finding schematics and scanning items within the world, and just going out into a massive galaxy and exploring new planets. As well as building bases, you can trade with NPCs, there are certain quest paths and lore to follow, plus a ton of update content to work through. It's really good to hear that they've made it more accessible. I was worried how new players to the game might be completely overwhelmed, as you can even be in something like Minecraft these days with the amount of changes that have been made there. If you weren't sure whether the Nintendo Switch was a place you could enjoy the game, well, rest assured you most certainly can. But it's important to think about whether you want that multiplayer aspect. Whether or not that will come later down the line on the Switch version is unclear, but the PlayStation 5 release that's just come out, and obviously the PC version, will have multiplayer right now if that's a route that you have available to you and it's a feature you need. As far as impossible ports on Switch though, this is right up there for me as probably one of the most impressive I've ever seen. Yes, I could make performance drop down, but it took quite a bit of work and it's still mighty impressive. As far as scores, well, it's a game I've always loved and it's only been improved, but I do miss multiplayer. Gameplay scores 16 out of 20, as does controls. While it's a stunning achievement to get this running on Switch, there are a few quirks to iron out. Visuals score 16 out of 20. It has a great, if a little sparse soundtrack, that scores 18 out of 20. And in terms of value, as I say, 6 years of updates, but lacking that all-important multiplayer. But $39.99 for a physical, that's not too bad. Value scores 16 out of 20. Giving it a SwitchUp score of 82%. If you've got any questions, then leave them down in the comments and I'll make sure to answer those. And we're hoping to be giving a copy of this one away to one of you lucky people. Thanks to our patrons and to all of you that enjoy the content. If you want to save 10% on any of your games, just use code SwitchUp over at switchup.gg. Totally legit, endorsed by Nintendo, and you can buy your eShop vouchers there. They're delivered instantly to you and you can save 10%. For all things Switch, all the time, keep it SwitchUp. Cheers guys, see ya!